I believe thumbs up is cue for me to begin, so I'll take that from the back of the room. Welcome to this special discussion, which is called Anti-Semitism's Dual Assault on Democracy. I'm your host for today. My name's Emma Barnett. I work at the BBC, mainly presenting Women's Hour, but maybe you know me from Newsnight or other things along those lines. Without further ado, let me tell you who we have. Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, leading efforts to advance US foreign policy to counter anti-Semitism around the world, a historian, academic, and author. I could carry on. Probably most famous prior to being the ambassador for being sued for libel by David Irving, who has the lovely title of leading Holocaust denier. And we'll perhaps come on to some of those things. But lovely to be with you, Ambassador. Thank you for being here. And to my right, Robin Simcox, Commissioner for Countering Extremism in the UK. So a rather large and important responsibility, not least at the moment, as we will hear. We will get to a discussion, but the Ambassador is going to make a few remarks first.
Fine. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Am I on? Am I mic'd? Yes, there we go. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I always like coming back to the UK when I'm not going to the royal courts, so that's always a kind of thrill. But it really is a delight, even though I come on what is not a happy errand or with a happy mandate. I have been in office now. This office has existed in the United States. The Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism has existed since about, I think, 2004 or 5. So across a number of administrations to both sides of the aisle, and we don't get to say that too much in American politics. I am the first one to hold the job at the level of ambassador, which means that I was nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The raising of the status of the office had nothing to do with me. It happened before President Biden nominated me, and I report directly to Secretary Blinken. To give you some sense of the importance with which the job is seen, there are other special envoys and at the State Department who deal with other issues, policy, LGBTQ, racial equity, and religious freedom, etc. But the thing I would like to say, I think, and I've been in office now for about a year and a half, a little more than that, going on close to 2 years, that I've come to recognize that we've been talking about anti-Semitism and thinking about anti-Semitism in the wrong or too narrow a fashion. And I believe it is exceptionally important, and I'm sure we can get into this in more detail, to think of it in as a multi-layered entity. The bottom layer and the first layer, of course, is a threat to Jews and the welfare of Jewish communities, Jewish institutions. And were it only that, it would be a valid thing to combat. Because if you think of a government's job as being in loco parentis for its citizens, a parent's job is one thing and one thing only, to protect the child. How you define protection, how that's played out, of course, is different, but that's a parent's job, to keep a child safe until the child can do that for themselves. And so too with governments, and especially in democratic governments, to pay special attention to the vulnerable in its midst. Elderly, children, sick, or to different care of water, medicine that would make people vulnerable. So if anti-Semitism were only a threat to Jews, it would be a valid thing for democracies to fight and to take seriously. But it is more than just, and I put just in air quotes, just that. It has become exceptionally clear to me, certainly well before October 7th. I wrote about this in my book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, but I've developed it. It's become clearer and much more multifaceted to me now. It's a threat to democracy. It's a threat to democracy because anybody who buys into the conspiracy myth, and I do not say conspiracy theory, because theories can be proven, the conspiracy myth which is the cornerstone of anti-Semitism and makes anti-Semitism different from other prejudices and consequently harder to combat, has bought into the idea that the Jews control the media, the banks, the government, whatever it might be, and essentially has given up on democracy. But more than just that, and this brings me sort of to the third level, it's a threat to national security and stability. Anti-Semitism, as the longest, oldest, most consistent hatred, is so deep into the roots, certainly of Western culture and beyond Western culture as well, that first of all, there is a tendency for people to believe it and believe these charges, even if they don't consider themselves anti-Semites, to believe charges to be true. But more importantly, anti-Semitism is something that authoritarian governments respond to, adapt, adopt. Not to say that in democratic governments and democratic entities there hasn't been anti-Semitism, including in my own country, but never as a formal policy of the government. Authoritarian governments and non-governmental entities often use anti-Semitism, sometimes ideologically, and sometimes in a utilitarian fashion, to make democratic countries, democratic states look like failed states, look unstable, or to make the citizens of those countries feel that democracy hasn't worked, to feel that they are under threat. In the middle of October, Hamas declared a day of rage on one Friday, and parents, I was in France shortly thereafter, and the heads of the Jewish schools told me that the vast majority of parents kept their kids home on that day. Even though the school implored them not to, we have guards, we have gendarmes, we have private security, your children will be safe. Parents decided not to. I'm not being the least bit critical. I can make wonderfully strong statements here on the BBC, in other quarters. When it comes to my children, I think differently, you know? But that was the case, and I'm told it was a similar case here in the United Kingdom, and some schools, in fact, canceled classes altogether. Nothing happened on that day, but the day was a success from the perspective of Hamas because it disrupted life, and it convinced people or made people think that maybe we are not safe here. Now, I'm not saying when I talk about utilitarian anti-Semitism and bad actors engaging in this, or what we call in the United States intelligence community, we don't use bad actors, malign influencers. It's very mellifluous, you know. I'm not suggesting they create anti-Semitism, but I'm suggesting that they can't create it ex nihilo, but they find the fires that are burning and know how to add fuel to them. And they may hate Jews, or they may not care about it, but see it as a useful tool. I think some of the charges that have come from Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine echo that, and the anti-Semitism engaged in that we've seen quite strongly on PRC, Chinese-controlled websites and social media platforms suggest that. I'm not suggesting, when I say utilitarian, it's not completely benign, if that's the word, because you still have to choose to take that lethal weapon off the shelf and use it. So in conclusion, I'm sorry if I've gone on too long, but in conclusion, I would say it's imperative for those of us who care about democracies and see the fragility of democracy. And I'm reminded, I think it was Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst system except for all the others. It's the most fragile of all of them because it calls for a consensus of its citizens. It calls for a trust among its citizens. And this is a terrific cooking spoon to stir up the pot. And I think it behooves all of us to begin to think of it in this multifaceted fashion. Thank you very much.